Welcome to my corner of the garage. This is a workbench that I made a few years ago when I had really just started getting into kind of hobbyist woodworking. And I made it because I needed to be able to tuck it away. Everything was mobile and really needed to get pushed against a wall. Some of the things I've added over the years is I have integrated power. I added this cheap Harbor Freight vise that somebody gave to me a while back, but I'm going to do some upgrades to it, and so I'm going to kind of take you along on the process. I'd also like to enclose everything so that I'm not getting sawdust on all my tools and storage. Because of the hardware on here, there's some definite play, and so I don't have a completely flat workbench, so I'm just going to make a solid workbench top.
So I realized while I was editing this video that with all the upgrades I'm doing on the workbench, as well as going into detail on the workbench top, it was going to be super long. So what I went ahead and did is I've uploaded a previous video that's all about this edge grain oak butcher block style workbench top that has a gap stop. So if you're interested, you can jump to that video now, or you can wait till the end of this one. But just know I've separated those out. So let's go ahead and get back into the workbench build. Before I can get into any of the upgrades, we got to strip this guy down to its bare bones. Because one of these sections was open before, so I could slide in a shop vac, I'm now having to add in a stretcher that goes the full length. And then what I'm doing here is, because I took the casters off, that removed about 3 inches of height from the workbench. So I'm adding this piece, and I'm drilling holes and countersinking some recesses so I can put some lag bolts in. And so I'm going to continue those holes. I will also secure this with some wood glue, but right as I was about to install this, the battery died in my camera right about here. And so just know those are glued and lag bolted down. The reason I decided to even change out the casters is because I found that doing some tasks, those old casters that always have the wheels on the ground, even when they're locked, sometimes tend to slide when you're doing pretty aggressive tasks like hand planing and things like that. And I found that having more of a footprint on the ground really will help. And then we can get to adding in some more pieces, maybe somewhat for support, but I wasn't too worried about the rigidity of it. But really what I needed is, because I'm adding a bunch of storage, I needed some pieces to connect the drawer slides to. So just some simple pocket hole screws, and getting these in place so that I can later attach those drawer slides. While it would have been much easier to just leave this stretcher in place, the problem is the Carpenter's vise that I'm going to install would actually interfere with that 2x4. So I'm going to have to shorten it to give some clearance for the vise, and then because of that, as well as because I'm adding some more storage, I'm going to have to put some blocks in place. And so this first setup, I'm going to be doing 2 of these that have a notch out to bring those pieces forward flush with the rest of the frame. What I'm marking out now is for another little spacer block that's going to be notched out on the top and bottom, as you can see there. And this will go right at the end of that front stretcher that had to get, cut short. And then what those are also going to do are going to give me a couple more places to attach some drawer slides to, as I'm going to have two more narrow drawers on the left, and then have my two wide drawers stacked on top of each other on the right. This step may be completely unnecessary, but it was kind of one of those just be safer than sorry, because it was going to be a whole lot easier to do it now. But this is just some 3/8 inch material from when we replaced some water damaged soffits on my house. So the idea here is, because I've got a split top bench, there's a chance some sawdust may fall down, especially if I've got the gap stop out and I'm clamping stuff, and I just didn't want to fill up my drawers with sawdust, so this was easy to just throw this under and screw it in, and that way I'll ensure that sawdust and stuff's not going to fall into my drawers. Shifting gears completely now, you can see the completed workbench top there in the background, and this is going to be an accessory for it. I have wanted a downdraft table for a while now, and as I was building the workbench, I thought, it'd be really nice to just incorporate it. I've seen some that kind of sit on your table or your workbench top, and it seems kind of cumbersome. So I thought, if I can actually incorporate this into the build, that'd be really awesome. So what I'm doing now is I'm building a real shallow box that's going to have a dust collector port on it. You saw me trim up an old blast gate that was broken, and so that will give me a port to connect to. And then this little box here is just going to be a cavity, so that as it's installed up underneath my workbench, I can drill some holes in it, and I'll have a built-in downdraft table. Just trying to seal it up as best I can with some caulk, and then I will reinforce the port with some screws. And I really at this point wasn't sure how important it was. Probably didn't need to, seal it, but thought, hey, might as well not take any chances. I'm drilling out. These are going to be the holes that actually mount it up underneath the workbench. I tried to make sure I got my layout exactly right, knowing where I was going to put that up underneath the workbench so that I could draw out a grid and start drilling holes. So I marked these out. There are between 150 and 200 holes, and I may go back and add some more. I want to kind of give this some use to see with time if that's really a good ratio of how many holes I need. I think in my case with a 2 horsepower dust collector, it really makes the hose pretty taut, as if it wants more airflow. So I probably will add some more holes in later, but I might test it out on another complete MDF box where I can test a bunch of holes to see what the ideal airflow is, and I might report back in the comments. You can leave a comment if you're interested in following my experimental process on this, but just getting it installed here. I will kind of give a demonstration at the end of the video if you stick around of this actually in use, but so now I can just drop the gap stop in and we're all done.
I found a sale on this vise, this Carpenters vise from Harbor Freight, a little while back, and went ahead and bought it, and have yet to install it, but it's got some nice features like a little stop block that can be raised. It seems like it's pretty heavy duty.
Because this vise could be installed in a much thicker workbench top, I'm using a piece of cherry to kind of shim up the vise to meet up right flush with my workbench top. So I'm drilling out some holes for the lag bolts to both hold the vise to it, but also to connect this piece of cherry to underneath the workbench top. While I've only been using this vise for a few weeks now, I did use it throughout this project later on, and I really like it. One of my favorite features is this quick release, and it works fantastic, seems very well built, so I'd recommend it. At this stage, I'm ready to put some skin on the frame or the skeleton of the workbench. And I kind of have some mixed feelings about this. I really wanted to do this step because right now the frame is pretty ugly, being all construction lumber, just rough 2x4s. And again, because I built it a few years ago, before I was really into fine woodworking, I didn't have a joiner and a planer yet. I needed a workbench. I kind of threw it together, and you can see here, I mean, there's stuff askew. There's things that are not quite square. They're just pocket hole jointed together, and so I'm having to clean the face up so I can even attach this, plywood skin on it. I wanted to enclose this whole thing, so I'm glad I did this process. I'm glad I put this over these 2x4s. You'll see how it really ties it all together in the end. But anyway, I think if I would have done it all over again, I would have made sure that I did it right from the get-go. I wouldn't recommend necessarily building this exact rough structure first if you were thinking about doing a similar build. I'd say watch my previous workbench video on how I constructed that. That thing is really stout, and because I took the time to mill up everything really well at the beginning, the whole build process was so much easier. Everything would square, and so anyway, it is what it is. But I just want to give that disclaimer here that it really does make a huge difference how you start the project, and again, making sure everything is really dialed in. In hindsight, if a few years ago when I built this, I would have had this finished product in mind, I probably would have just started with 3/4 inch material and made this whole box out of that instead of having to put a layer of plywood over a 2x4 frame. I was one pair short of the nicer drawer slide, so I had to install this crappy non-fully extendable kind. The rest are the nicer ones. And you can see here in this shot that the pre-drilled holes for normal placement don't quite reach that back support. So I'm just having to make a couple more holes in the back of each of these drawer slides. At this point, we can go ahead and enclose the whole rest of the workbench. So I'm just cutting some panels to size to put on the other 3 sides. And I cut them a little bit oversized, and then I am just using 23 gauge pin nails to attach these. And then because they're a bit oversized, I can then use a trim router to get that exactly flushed up. Again, because it's not perfectly square this way, it matches the rest of the frame. And then I need to notch out for the casters on the 2 side pieces. And don't worry if you're concerned about those corners and the exposed plywood. I've got a plan to beautify those a little bit later on. Because there's not really accessibility from the inside now to attach the workbench top, I'm going to use some figure-8 fasteners, and I forgot to film the latter ones, but I wised up and used a chisel to notch that wood out instead of a saw. In addition to the gap stop, I'm really excited about the split top workbench design for clamping things. I can now easily get a clamp anywhere in the middle of my workbench. So if I'm trying to clamp a workpiece down and I don't have dog holes purposefully so I don't drop stuff in them, I have more options for clamping. I have wanted this upgrade on a workbench for a while now. So what I'm doing is sketching out some holders that will have a long dowel between them that's going to have a brown paper roll on it. And what that'll allow me to do is always have brown paper at my disposal. So if I'm doing a glue up or stain or paint or anything, I can roll that paper out and then easily wind it back up. So I attached them together with some double-sided tape, obviously drilled out that hole for the dowel to go through, and then just rough cutting it out. Yes, I am literally measuring my grasp or my grip so that I can make a wheel that is going to be for winding that paper roll back up. And so what I'm actually able to do is use that same measurement to make, I believe it's 6 different markings, and then I use the half of that to make 6 more. So then I can drill out at each of those points all around this circle, which you'll see me do now. And this is kind of just a nice, easy way to make a, I don't know if you call it a sprocketed wheel, kind of like a gear. And then I'm going to use a router and obviously the circle cutting jig to fully or almost fully cut that circle out. Now I will say it took me a couple of tries to figure out exactly how long each of those sprockets need to be. I kind of overshot it the first go around, and the sprockets were kind of too long. So this is the initial pass of me kind of doing a test circle. I wanted to be a little safe and go on the larger side. And so as I looked at it, I kind of realized, no, those sprockets are a little bit too long. So I threw it back in there and I shortened them up. Now, word to the wise, I went a little bit too fast on this pass. And as you'll see here, what ended up happening is that router chipped out some of those sprockets. So take your time, go a little bit slower on those passes, and it should work out a little bit better for you. I didn't need to go all the way through with the drill press or the router because we've got a template now. So we can free this up, and then we'll take it over to the router table and flush up that gear, those sprockets, on the rest of it. And then obviously there's still a bit of cleaning up to do. I can use the spindle sander to ease some of those places where there was chip out, and it didn't bother me too much. It still ended up being a nice grip, especially after adding an 1/8 inch round over. So it's not perfect, but I really liked the way it worked out. I thought I'd save a couple of bucks by getting this poplar dowel, which I regret in the end because it was pretty flexible once you put that big heavy roll of brown paper on it. But secondly, I didn't get a good centered hole drilled, and it being poplar, it really wanted a splinter, as you'll hear in just a moment when I put this threaded insert in. So I'm going to show you a better method here in just a moment, but like I said, this really didn't work out well as you Oh, I can hear that crack. So let's shift gears. This is a great tip I learned on YouTube. I'm making a template by drilling out a hole that's the same diameter as my dowel, and then I'm going to drill out the same, in the center of that, the same diameter or more or less of my threaded insert. So then what I can do is pop this little jig down on top so it's nice and snug, and then drill out using the guide with that drill bit, and then as you can see here, it's a much more centered hole. Now, I tried doing it this way and still started to split the oak. So I figured out a better clamping solution for a dowel, so threw some zip ties on there. Now, I don't have a wood tap that's as big as those threads are of the threaded inserts, so what I'm doing is I'm putting some paste wax on the threaded insert and just kind of easing it in and out, and that seemed to, especially with those clamps on there, those zip ties, that seemed to keep it from splitting as easily and was able to get some good grooves in there for the threaded inserts. But you obviously want to clean both the threaded insert and the hole out from that wax, so when you add the CA glue, it's actually going to adhere. So you've got a nice centered threaded insert in this dowel now. And then I'm going to basically repeat the process. I'll cut this one down to size and then do the same thing on the other end so that I can put a little cap on it on the opposite end of the wheel. These rolls come in 36 inches, which is longer than my workbench top is wide. So I am just chopping this down at the bandsaw. All right, it's time to turn our attention to making some drawer boxes, and oops, I definitely was forgetting the limitations of my workbench top there, but luckily nothing was banged up or dented very bad. I make my shop drawers out of 1/2-inch plywood. I don't do any fancy joinery. I just glue them together, throw some brad nails in, and then I'll add some screws for reinforcement, which may not even really be necessary, but just makes me feel a little bit better. So again, nothing super fancy here. We'll just kind of do a quick montage of building these and installing the drawers. I am cutting the faces of the drawers at this time, And what I want to show you now is here's my miter saw station workbench, and I really like these handles. And so I'm going to go ahead and make some more, and on this workbench they're going to be out of white oak because I've got a bunch of the scraps on hand. Obviously I love the cherry contrast with the plywood, but this just won't be as pretty. I'm using a cove bit, and I'm doing this in a couple of passes, but this will be the profile that allows you to grip your fingers underneath the drawer pull. I am setting the blade to now cut out up into that cove. And so I'm checking it. I can nudge the fence over a little bit, and I'll try it again the second pass, and I ended up being dead on this go round. So I'm taking off that part in the back, which is going to sit on the drawer face, allowing that pull for your fingers to get in there. And then at this point, I'm going to remove the majority of the material I don't need, except for the center part of the handle. That's a longer one you're seeing now. This is one of the shorter ones. And here's where I think some type of pattern would really assist, but I'm just using a washer to kind of get those curves where I want them. And then because I cut off all that material already underneath where the cove is, I've got to kind of shim it up for me to do this next process of cutting out that curve. If I ever make these specific drawer pulls again, I think I want to make some type of router template that I can just use a pattern cutting bit and just do that in one pass, so I'm not having to use the scroll saw. And then there's quite a bit of cleanup, as you can see here, with a spindle sander to really get that to its line. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit thicker 1/4 inch round over on everything. And I've said this in my other videos, I hate drawer pulls that snag on things and your clothes as you walk by. So I like the real round to the touch feel, as well as a smooth transition so it's not going to catch your clothes. So last time, putting that little block in place so that I can put that 1/4 inch round over on the bottom of those handles as well. Before I can actually attach the drawer pulls to the drawer faces, I need to edge band each of the sides, and this is 3/4 inch thick edge banding, so it left quite a bit of overhang on both sides. And I've kind of decided to try a new way using the gap stop here and my Carpenter's vise to hold that up against the gap stop. And I really liked this method of just kind of scoring it with the chisel. And sometimes you have to go back and get a couple of places, but again, it scores it really nicely. You can just usually peel it right off, flip it over, and do the same on the back. So I don't know if this will work as well with 3/4 inch material where there's not as much overhang, but this ended up working out really well for this stuff. This right here is exactly one of the kinds of processes that makes me love having this gap stop. So often I'm trying to just put a piece of material on my workbench to work on it, and it sliding around is just so frustrating. So having something to just quickly throw up to stop it from moving so I can work on it is just so handy. And this made the step of putting all these drawer pulls on just so enjoyable. My shop apprentice number 2 had to come over and check out what I was doing, and I gotta say he's pretty darn cute, so I left that footage in. We are in the home stretch now. If you remember earlier, I said I was going to do something to address the ugly corners of the workbench with that exposed plywood. So I'm going to end up making some corner molding or corner trim for each of those 4 corners. So I cut down these square dowels of 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch white oak. I'm rounding over 3 of those corners with a 1/4 inch round over bit. And then now what I can do is take out the bulk of the material to leave about a 1/4 inch on either side. You can see here in this shot, I've made the one pass, then I can flip it over and make the corresponding pass on the other side. Here you can see that profile exactly, which is basically just a corner trim, corner molding, and once again using the gap stop to throw these slightly awkward pieces to sand up there and get them all cleaned up. I would have just kicked myself if I would have left this exposed plywood there. And after all the little details and, tying in the white oak throughout the project, I knew I was going to appreciate this final step. But man, I just really loved how it tied in everything together and was kind of just the final bow on the project itself.
And with that, the initial workbench is complete. And I say it that way because, yes, like my last workbench build video, I have an upcoming video planned where I make some add-ons and features that couldn't fit in this video, but will also help improve my workflow. So just as a reminder, this is what this thing looked like when I first made it a few years ago. And here we are now. I will go ahead and close with just some final shots of some of its features in action, but get subscribed if you're not already and want to see the follow-up video for this. Thank you so much for joining me and sticking through to the end of the video. So enjoy these final shots now and hope to see you on the next one. Thanks.